Okay, here I want to do a guide that is more of a quick overview, but it's going to be overall all of the Tier 5 heavies. I will not include the premium offerings that World of Tanks has. This will only be what you can research for free without spending a dime on the game if you do not want to. I will start here with the T1 Heavy, but basically what I'm going to do is I will show you a little bit about the tank, enough that you would have a generalized idea of how to play it, also how to fight against it, and then I'll show you an ace tanker battle in which I played it, and then I'll move on to the next. We will be going over all of the researchable Tier 5 heavies. Like I said, there are 7 of them, and I'll be doing them in the order of most common. The T1 Heavy and the KV1 are very common as they are popular for the tanks that are researched after them. And with the T1 Heavy, that would be the T29, and then on down the line, the T32, the M103, and the T110E5. For the KV1, of course, that leads to a whole number of Russian heavies that are very popular. And then I'll move on to the Vk30.01H. Then I'll show you the Churchill 1, move on to the BDR, the KV1S, and the OI Experimental. I'll try to stick to that order if I can remember to. Now, the T1 Heavy, of course, is the Tier 5 American heavy tank choice. You would get it after playing through the M3 Lee, and it's the other Tier 5 alongside of the M4 Sherman. Basically, it comes with the same gun off of the M4 Sherman, the 76mm M1A1, as I am popping up on the screen right here. Good rate of fire, decent penetration for the tier, and a decent amount of damage, and the average damage per minute, as you can see there, is just a touch under 2,000, which basically that would be how many shots you can get on target, the average damage factored over every shot penetrating, which, simple math, that would be 115 average damage multiplied by a rate of fire of 16.7, which would come up to a total of 1,917. Basically, the T1 Heavy is all about damage per minute, the ability to use good gun depression, as it has negative 10 degrees, and the fact that this thing is a absolute bully. It has the highest frontal armor value of all the researchable Tier 5 heavies. Now, a couple premiums have higher armor, but out of what you can research just by normal playing, it has the highest armor rating, which is 95 millimeters of frontal armor, and unlike most tanks, normally on a tank you would shoot at the lower plate. That's where the thickest armor on the T1 Heavy is. The upper hull is a little bit thinner, but still, even the upper hull that's thinner on the T1 Heavy is thicker than anything else on any of the other Tier 5s. Now, drawback to that is you can see this is a large tank. It's tall, it's long, and the armor is much thinner on the sides and on the rear. It is a breakthrough tank meant to plow right through the enemy, keeping its front shown and trying to eliminate shots to its side. It's a great platooning tank by having people watching your sides if they follow just a little bit behind. And it's not a very common tactic, but 3 T1 Heavies, if they're top tier, they absolutely can wipe out the enemy based on the fact that keep your front to the enemy team and just plow. Because not only does it have that high frontal armor on both the front of the hull and the turret, this thing can move. If you look down at the mobility here, 35.4 kilometers per hour, and decent traverse, and a big engine. The reason why this back end's so big is that is a big engine with 960 horsepower. That's pushing a 60-ton tank. So this thing is a great ramming vehicle. So basics overall, great for ramming, great for pushing forward through a narrow area, going point blank at the enemy, and also good for hull down because of that great gun depression. Now we're going to go on over to tanks.gg, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about this armor profile, because basically basic rule of thumb with the T1 Heavy is this 76 millimeter, the 128 millimeters of armor-piercing penetration is good enough for everything in your own tier, except for maybe an AT2 if you have to kill him quickly, or maybe some of the premiums such as a KV220, which you see I have in my garage. Firing premium at him would be definitely excusable. That thing has 120 millimeters of frontal hull armor, and other than that, you save your APCR, which you see I have 25 loaded. Save that for tier 6s and 7s. There's not much in the way of difficult things that I need to explain on how to play a T1 Heavy. Hull down means you get behind cover. It does not necessarily mean you're behind a ridge. It means anything that covers up your hull. So it can be a blown up tank, whether teammate or enemy. If you pull in behind it, the T1 Heavy is tall, so you can actually pull in behind something like a KV1 or an AT2 or a Churchill 1 that has a lower hull, and you can actually shoot over it. A pretty neat tactic is you can get a T1 Heavy to push a AT2, and that's a pretty deadly combination. Now, like I said, we're going to go over to tanks.gg and show you the exact specs on the hull. Now here we are at tanks.gg looking at the 3D model of the T1 Heavy. As you can see, unlike most tanks, that lower portion is thick. That is a 95.3 millimeter chunk of armor right up front, right where most people would be thinking to shoot, because one of the basics that people try to catch on to is general rules of thumb of where to shoot tanks. And kind of rules of thumb is you shoot for the lower plate on so many tanks that it becomes just habit for especially newer players that you're going to face in tier 5 when they're playing their tier 3s or 4s, and many players move on past tier 5 and never even get the hang of trying to pick out weak spots on specific tanks rather than just going by rules of thumb. Because somebody with a 100 penetration gun, if they're shooting at this, if they don't hit it absolute dead on at point blank range, because this is very close. Now if you move that out to say 100 meters, this would drop off drastically, and now all of a sudden you've got a bounce. And if the T1 Heavy just angles away a little bit, say if he's got his side covered up here, 100 penetration gun's going to struggle there. And the thing is, T1 Heavy is normally moving and rocking around, and that makes it hard to hit. And like I said, the upper plate is actually weaker, but it's still over 80 millimeters of armor at a decent angle. So that is not a easy tank to penetrate frontally. Now, the turret is actually even thicker. As you can see, the turret cheeks go well over 200 millimeters effective armor. That's 227. The mantlet right next to the gun has no armor behind it, so it's just the mantlet itself, which is 101.6 millimeters thick. But when it overlaps, now you have over 300 millimeters of armor where the mantlet corners overlap the turret face. Now, like I said, the drawback to the T1 Heavy's armor layout is the sides, the rear, and the roof. This big engine deck is a tempting target for artillery. But the main thing is, if you're going to play a T1 Heavy, you try to either, if you're going to hug a corner, you do so by putting your turret just over the very inside of your front track, whether it's on one side or the other, like so. If you had a building here beside you, and you can poke out, and your armor is quite effective. 90 some millimeters of armor may not sound like a lot if you're a high tier player, but here at tier 5, that's enough to easily bounce so many guns. Because I have bounced 1,000 damage routinely in my T1 Heavy. And it's because you don't sit still. You rock back and forth, you're peppering the target with the shots, and that normally will panic them into firing off less than fully aimed shots. So you're going to see lots of bounces off this rounded front, lots of bounces off the turret, and unless they have a high penetration gunner or a firing premium, even this upper plate will bounce quite a bit. Your sides and rear don't count on anything. So it's a simple tank to actually play in that show your turret or keep your front to the enemy. Now, just a little bit more on it. Go back to the garage. And back in the garage here. What I will do now is just go over, I'll run down a few of the statistics of how I set mine up, or a few of the specs and crew skills that I like. Now, as a T1 Heavy, you will end up finding out that you do like to ram. I run a small liner specifically for that reason, and because of all the howitzers that you see at Tier 5. That it does provide quite a bit of extra reduction to the damage you'll take from high explosive, and now that they have the stun effect, it actually even reduces the stun you take. So with the fast firing artillery in the mid tiers, the small liner is actually worth it, because high explosive shots aren't going to penetrate your front. Whether artillery or howitzer fired, they're not going to penetrate your front. And reducing the damage you take keeps your hit points intact. All 660 of them go a long ways in Tier 5 if you can maintain as many of them as you can towards the end of the battle. Now, I also run vents for overall improvements everywhere, and rammer for more DPM, which, as you've seen, instead of having just over 1900, I'm almost pushing 2300. Now, crew skills, down here at the bottom, I do have on my loader and radio operator, I have them both working on repairs. Safe stowage is something that's quite nice on anything personally that relies on DPM, and I've tossed on firefighting on the radio operator, because you do have a large engine, and having at least somebody training is a little bit of help. And my driver, clutch braking helps speed up the traverse speed, and controlled impact for more ramming effectiveness. The gunner, I have Deadeye, because again, DPM means more shots on target. Deadeye is a percentage raise of your critical hits. So having Deadeye on something with a high rate of fire is very helpful. And Snapshot to help keep the bloom down while moving and firing. The other gunner, I have Designated Target, which is not something I normally use, but having two gunners here in the T1 Heavy, I figured I would make use of it. Helps keep the target spotted longer. And I do see this coming into play when I am the lead vehicle and actually spotting the targets. And then, because I do brawl with it a lot, I've tossed on Armorer to help with the accuracy of a damaged gun. Because you go hold down, and against howitzers, your gun will take damage. And on the Commander, I have Sixth Sense and Recon. Pretty typical setup for a Commander. You could, as you're working up, just run full repairs, and that would be just fine until you get up to your first completed skill, and then I would put combat skills on this, like I have myself. But now on to the Ace Tanker replay. Okay, here for the Ace Tanker replay in the T1 Heavy. It's going to find me in a Tier 6 battle here on Winterberg, which is just simply the snowy version of Ruinberg. But as you can see in the team list, there's not that many Tier 6s, so I'm going to play this much like as if I was a top tier, because I personally love the T1 Heavy in a city map, and so I am immediately trying to get over into a position right there along the little half circle on the inside of town. And this, right away you can see the T1 Heavy has no trouble getting up to top speed, even as one of our light tanks is actually going into the town. Never will understand when they want to do that. But I got an SU-100 up ahead of me, and I do have some support in the form of some smaller tanks. But regardless, I am going to go take the corner over here. And already I see a T-34. He's poking out. And he gets pretty lucky there. His tracks actually completely absorb my shot. I back off for a second. And then I decide after the SU-100 lands that massive hit, I am just going to take this chance just to go for it. Snap a shot onto him. And decide I'm going to keep pushing. I glance over at the OI experimental, but I decide since this SU-100 is going to be aggressive, I am going to just plow in. Now, I ignore the AT-2 to start with because I want to take out his support. And once the Crusader's down, now let's finish off the AT-2. And for some reason, he decides to push the corner, and I'm just shooting in on the back.
Enemy armor is destroyed.
And at point blank range, don't even need APCR to penetrate him. Now I decide I'm going to go take care of this OI experimental. And quickly realize he's got a little bit of help with him.
Permission to engage.
And I just poke out, start picking away at the Electo. The OI experimental, he plants a shot into me. He's going to be on reload for at least about 8 or 9 seconds, so I take the chance to kill his support. And now I'm going to start to side scrape back and take out the other Electo. The OI gets a chance to land one shot, but he's not going to get another shot off. Between myself and my teammates, he's just going to go down before he shoots again. Now, on 4 kills, I decide I'm going to push right up the middle. And we've won the town. And instead of circling around the enemy base, like I said, I just want to push straight up the middle road here. I'm going to hug the buildings on my right so that I'm not completely out in the open. Just making sure none of those enemies are coming that way. Pause for a second. And I see we've got a light tank who's got himself up in the cubby hole. I'm looking down the road because I don't want to take a hit from that SU up there. And decide that it's worth the risk, so I'm just going to push up because I need to take out this light tank on my left. And I auto aim on him. 1 hit. He does hit me and penetrate, but it was worth it to take the hit to get rid of the enemy. Clicking up there to warn that that's where the enemy SU-100 was last. And my teammate goes down in front of me. So does the enemy Churchill. Firing on the move at the Hummel. Almost get the kill. Somebody snags it. I'm looking for my top gun here is what I was trying to do. So I decide I'm just going to earn my top gun. I'm going to have to go face down this SU-100 up in the east. And he hasn't fired at me, and I've been spotted multiple times, so I figure he must not have a direct line of fire towards the town. And sure enough, he's actually up in the middle of the buildings. He was looking down towards my teammates, so it gives me the chance to get up here and start putting some hits into him. And I switch over to APCR on this shot to make him count, and then plow into him. And as you can see, the ramming is very satisfying with a T1 Heavy. But that was an ace tanker there on the Winterberg. Got the Bruiser. That's a duelist. Fire for effect. Also got high caliber. I did get the Top Gun and a Kamikaze for plowing into the SU-100. Ended up with 2,102 damage. Got the 6 kills there. 1,282 experience. There's the medals again. And the details. Fired 26 shots, 22 hits, and 20 penetrations. Very good ratios overall. And because I only used premium at the end, I did actually make over 21,000 credits. So very, very nice, consistent performance out of the T1 Heavy. Okay, here we are back in the garage with the second tank of the guide, the KV1. the single most popular Tier 5 Heavy in the game, basically, since it's been around. Now, the reason for that popularity is basically it's easy to play. It's got overall armor of 75 millimeters in the front of the hull, 75 on the side, and 70 on the rear, which is higher than the rear armor, the weakest, except for one spot, which I'll show you. The rear armor generally is actually stronger than most of the penetration of some of the Tier 3s and 4s that have long since agonized over this specific vehicle here. Now the turret has 110 all the way around, so that's a fairly tough overall tank. Doesn't have the sheer frontal armor of the T1 Heavy, but overall is better. And it's smaller, lower profile. Now, it loses the massive engine of the T1 Heavy. It loses the fantastic gun depression, has OK at -7 compared to the -10 of the T1 Heavy. Its engine, like I said, it loses that massive engine, and it has almost half the power. So it is sluggish, but durable. And moving on to the weapons. Weapon of choice, for me, is the 85 millimeter. I'll actually just center this one up. Other weapons that people like is the 122 U11. It is usable. And then you have the 57 millimeter. This one is the same gun as what is mounted on the Tier 5 medium, the T34. You have 3 choices, and all are usable. I run the 85 for the overall punchiness, even if it is a little clumsy handling. As you can see, the aiming time is 2.9, which is the same as a howitzer. The dispersion is 0.42, which is not good, and combined with iffy accuracy and long aim time, you'll see even in my Ace Tanker replay there's a lot of wasted shots because, well, it's just very clumsy, and sometimes I get impatient and rush the shots. It also pays in penetration. It doesn't have the penetration of even that 76 millimeter of the T1 Heavy, which it loses 8 millimeters on the armor piercing, and it loses over 10 on the APCR. So combined with lack of accuracy and a lower rate of fire, this can sometimes struggle when bottom tier, this specific gun, and that's why some people choose either the 57 or the howitzer. The 57 millimeter gives up armor piercing penetration, but goes quite a bit higher on the APCR, and the rate of fire is over double. So, damage per minute is quite high because it has over double the rate of fire, and it does not have less than half the damage. So the DPM on this 57 millimeter is very high, and if you can catch somebody in the open, that 57 millimeter can be quite useful. Now the howitzer, one of the punchiest in Tier 5. It's 122 millimeters, which basically with the howitzer, the bigger the gun, the more AG it carries, the more damage it can do, which is why it has fairly high penetration at 61 millimeters and a big punch of 450 damage per shot. And it also has 140 millimeters of heat penetration on its premium shell with 370 damage. That thing can pack a punch, but in my opinion, the KV1's a little sluggish to make the most use of it. So I run the 85, and you'll see that in the replay. Now, as you can see, the 85 millimeter puts out pretty good damage per minute. Now, I am getting penalized because my commander is at 97%. So these statistics aren't as high as they can possibly go. And already, with my rammer vents, you can see the DPM is up there with the T1 Heavy, and the aiming time has been dropped down because of the vents. Now, one thing I would highly recommend, I'll go ahead and do the armor profile, and then we'll come back and I'll do some recommendations and one thing that I do recommend you'll see most certainly if you've had any experience in playing this or fighting against it. But we're going to go on over to tanks.gg first. And here we are at tanks.gg looking at the armor profile of the 3D model of the KV1. And as you can see, KV1 head on, that 75 millimeters of armor on the front is sloped back, so it is fairly effective up front. And there is this very, very trollish strip of armor at the point where the armor overlaps, and they have a flat strip of steel welded on over it to protect that joint. You can see that actually is a 100 millimeter strip, which can be kind of frustrating if you're trying to place shots onto the thinner plate here, which is, if you're in a T1 Heavy, if you can shoot down on this plate, that is a guaranteed penetration, and a lot of people don't know it. That is only 40 millimeters of armor there. It's angled back at a very steep angle, but that's also where you shoot it. If you're playing, say, an M4 Sherman or a PZ4H and you have the howitzer, shoot a KV1 here, right on that mid upper plate. Not the top upper plate, but the middle one. And if you're shooting down at it, that's a much easier penetration than shooting at where the driver is. Now, I mentioned something about the rear. This is something a lot of people don't know, but as you can see, there's an overhang. And I'll go to the live model. Actually, we'll go to the visual. Okay. You can see what we're looking at is the exhaust. Visually, if you're seeing the back end of a KV1, you see the exhaust screen there. Shoot for it. That's where you shoot. If you don't want to be firing premium all over the place, and you're in something like, oh, say a PZ3, the Tier 4, a German medium, it's got the 5 millimeter weapon, has 67 millimeters of penetration, and you don't want to fire tons and tons of premium, but you keep running into KV1s. Well, you're a little lower than he is, and you're going to have shots right into the exhaust. And as you can see there, it's only 30 millimeters. Now, it's not an easy shot, but you will go through there, and one vulnerability of the KV1, that engine loves to catch fire. The listed fire chance, I think, is a little generous. It's not listed as being ultra vulnerable to fires, but I catch KV1s on fire more than just about any other vehicle in the game. And it's all because I shoot for their engines. This area right here, biggest weakness of the KV1. Shoot for that engine, and the already really sluggish tank will be caught on fire, engine's damaged. The driver will be trying to put out his fire and repair his engine, and then do it again. And if you can do it twice in a row, you'll have just knocked out that tank, because he will burn down the second time. Because even with our new consumables that come back after 90 seconds, if he's caught on fire a second time, he'll burn down before that fire extinguisher gets to come back up. But again, right there, you've got a 50 millimeter strip of armor above where you see the exhaust curve down, but right below that is only 30 millimeters. Now, for a KV1 driver to increase his survivability, one thing you can do, side scrape. Having just as thick of armor on the side as the front lends this vehicle to be extremely durable when side scraping, and you can give a much more generous angle. And as you can see, if you're trying to figure out how to do it, turn your turret over the corner of your track. If you're looking from above and you're driving the KV1, and you've got a building over here, right over here, put your front towards it, back out at an angle, as you can see here. If you're aiming at the enemy this way, their shots are just going to ting off or get eaten by your tracks. And this is the angle you would want if you look down on that. Your gun pointing over the corner of your tracks. The KV1 can get away with it. This is actually a little excessive angle, but it can get away with it because the effective angling here is only about 57, 58, all the way to 60, because of how thick the armor is. It's 75 millimeters of armor, and at this angle you can see it approaches near 150 millimeters, 140 to actually all the way back to 160. So around about an average of 150 millimeters of effective armor while side scraping. And with that turret, the KV1 is also durable when hull down. And again, you don't have to have great gun depression to go hull down. Debris, if it's debris scattered over, like say in the alleyway on Himmelsdorf, you've got debris that comes over at an angle. If you can get most of your hull covered, only show them your turret. You can see as I pass over the turret front, there's a lot of thick armor there and very few weaknesses. That KV1, if it gets hull down, can be a fairly tough nut to crack even for tier 6s and some tier 7s. So don't forget that. But we're going to go back to the garage and do the few recommendations that I have for tank setup and crew. Now back in the garage. The one weakness I was talking about, as I said there, if you get shot in the back and you're running a KV1, I know it costs a bit, run an automatic fire extinguisher at all times as you're playing this. As you can see, when you pull up, you get that 10% boost to fire protection. It actually reduces your chances of getting caught on fire. The manual one, it only puts out fires. The automatic actually reduces your chances of being caught on fire in the first place. And of course, it instantly puts the fire out as soon as you're caught on fire, which saves hit points. And the KV1 will be caught on fire. It's just a matter of time. Other tanks don't have that stigma attached to them, but the KV1 will go up in flames. It's just, as soon as somebody knows to shoot your engine, if they do know to shoot there repetitively, you will be caught on fire. And unfortunately, you're not mobile enough to avoid it if you're caught and a medium is trying to circle you. If they know what they're doing, they'll put shots after shots into your back end, and they'll probably track you and knock your engine out and put you on fire. So definitely run a automatic fire extinguisher. Even if you don't run the large repair kit or large medical kit, run the fire extinguisher. Now again, because all the howitzers and the thickness of the armor, I do run a spall liner on the KV1. That's more about the sheer durability factor, because you're not going to ram a whole lot with a tank as sluggish as the KV1. And it's not its top speed, because the top speed of the T1 Heavy and the KV1 is not that much different. But it's just the fact it takes so long to get up to speed, and it turns so sluggishly, most people can get out of the way. But the fact that you're going to face so many howitzers, and the fact that you're sluggish, which makes you a artillery target, this helps with all of that. And again, just like the T1 Heavy, I run vents and a gun rammer. Now, this crew, I just bought the KV1 back about a month ago to play it a bit and get myself refreshed on it before doing this guide. This is obviously a crew that's in training. My gunner doesn't even have full skills yet. And as you can see, full repairs. Until you get them all the way up to a full set of second skills, I would leave the repairs on the KV1 all the way. Even once they hit 100, I would leave them at 100% repairs and then work on more skills, because this is a up-close personal brawling fighting tank. It's going to take a beating, and those repairs help keep the tracks up. And this is one where you could even swap out the vents for a toolbox, because your tracks, you're going to be up close and taking hits. Your tracks absorb a lot, but they will get blown off. And anything you can do to help keep your tracks on so you're not immobilized, I would. But now I'll send you on to the Ace Tanker replay, and then we'll move on to the next tank after that. Okay, the next battle here, this one of course being the KV1, finds me on Fiery Salient, again, a middle tier, sort of. It's a tier 5-6 split battle, and we have just a few of tier 6s up ahead of me, and a number of tier 5s below. I actually like this sort of a battle quite well. There's enough hit points on the battlefield to make for a good game, but you don't feel like you're absolutely outclassed completely. Because as you can see, a little over a third of the entire team is made up of tier 6s on both sides. But me being the most durable of the heavies overall, as far as being able to take a beating, because there is artillery here, I decide I will move up to the typical heavy spot on this map, whether it be Fiery Salient or Prokhorovka proper. Got a T1 Heavy with me for support. Now, he's the better hull-down tank in the fact that he has better gun depression, but those big sides, as you can see, he is much bigger than me. His sides are really exposed if he tries to cover this ridge too much. Whereas I am a lower profile tank with thicker side armor, I can afford to be a little more careless up on the ridge line. But I get in position. Of course, this crew is in training. I don't have sixth sense, so I just basically plan to be spotted. But I sit with some concealment to my right and in front of me, so I can hopefully get some shots up here. But this is where you're going to see the clumsy handling of the 85 come into play. I have to wait quite a while for it to aim in. You see me glance around, I wonder how in the world I get shot from the back, but I guess I must have pulled in front of the T1 Heavy, or he pulled up right behind me just the wrong time, and we crisscrossed, and he actually bounced a shot off the back of my turret. But the enemy has pushed this eastern hill quite heavily, and I'm trying to get shots on these guys, and I'm just wasting shots. Finally land another one. But I got Nashorns up here, and my 85 just is not cooperating. Finally land another hit and get a kill off the Nashorn there. But as you can see, that was a mostly aim shot, and it went flying at the very far edge of the circle. Now these moving targets, I'm not having much luck because I don't have time necessarily to let it fully aim. And when it does, of course at this range that you're seeing, my penetration has dropped off quite a lot, and I only started out with 120, so things like that KV1 up on the hill, that's going to be a lot of bouncing off of it. That shot flew well higher than where I was aiming. That one looks like it had hit the dirt. And like I said, I don't have any skills in this crew, so I don't know if I'm spotted or not. I just assume I probably am. Especially with enemies having lines of sight all around. And there's the KV1 again. I'm trying to aim in. I've got premium loaded, and that punched through. And again, I actually don't know where in the world that one went. He must be in a dip there, and I must have hit the dirt a few times. Got another one to finally go through. He goes dark, and I actually nail him. I guessed that he was just going to keep backing up, and sure enough, it went right into him. Now, I've still got premium loaded, but I don't want to waste the chance. When there's a spotted artillery, I'm definitely going to want to hit him. And I've already switched to AP. As you can see, I bounced a shot from the KV2, so he had armor piercing loaded rather than HE. I bounced a 700 damage shot, and there was no fizzling, so that was not a heat shot, which of course, if you played World of Tanks a long time ago, the KV2 used to carry heat shells. So now, you only get HE and AP, but a long time ago, that could have been a heat shell. Just like what the SU-152 carries at one tier higher. But that KV2 must have been firing AP, and I don't know if it was the premium or not. Like I've said before, I don't run any mods, but either he was a player who didn't know what to fire, or he did and just got very unlucky with his shot, because I will actually shoot AP out of my KV2 if I'm top tier, because it's almost a guaranteed hit and kill on most tier 5 heavies. As you can see, I've been dealing with Excelsior, and I don't know what the T-67 was doing. He charged right in front of me. I guess he thought that I had a much longer reload, but he was sitting right on top of the ridgeline. I had clear shots on him, but for some reason he just sat there. But we've won most of the map here. We've got our team's pushing down the west. We've mostly secured the middle. The only thing we don't have good control of is the east. And the enemy Churchill 7 is actually doing quite well over there. And still have this KV2 to deal with, and I've got my premium loaded for him. I'm hoping my teammate here in the T1 Heavy doesn't pull out in front of the KV2, because his side would be a very juicy target. I decide I'm going to push up across the tracks, because as the last teammate dies over here, nobody has eyes, or at the very least a presence over here in the whole eastern side of the map. So even though the KV1's got terrible view range, I decide I'm going to park with the building between me and the KV2, get it behind some shrubs, and see if I can't be of some use spotting that Churchill 7. Now I see him. I'm not firing yet, because I know he can't have spotted me just yet. But I'm watching my reticle, because his armor's actually quite good. I have premium loaded, and first one fires, it sails way higher than where I aimed it. Next one goes over his turret, and I finally put one through his turret, and artillery kind of saves me there. Because that's actually a very bad matchup for the KV1. I see a leopard running away. I still had my premium loaded, so I'm just wasting shots now. But I actually managed to sneak in a tracking shot on him right as the KV2's charging me, and the game cuts out. Got my ace tanker, that's shell proof, fire for effect, and a high caliber, and ended with 2,105 damage, only 3 kills, and over 1,000 with 1,086 experience. Fired 32 shots with 20 hits and 15 penetrations, nowhere near the success rate of the T1 Heavy in the previous game. Okay, now we're on to the third tank that I'm going to feature in this first part of the Tier 5 Heavy guide. That would be the German offering, the Vk30.01H. This tank is not like the T1 Heavy or the KV1. To put it quite simply, it's more of a finesse tank, and it's much more of a support tank. The armor is nowhere near as good as either one of the previous two tanks, but what it makes up for with lack of armor is in this fantastic weapon. This weapon here is, in my opinion, the best in Tier 5. At least on the heavy tanks. Now, what that weapon is 7.5 to 5.5 WAF. Used to be known as the Konish. And what it is, in real life, it's actually a squeeze bore weapon that was prototyped. And it actually starts out as a 75mm gun and squashes the projectile as it leaves the gun tube down to 55mm, and by doing so it builds up more pressure behind the shell, and it fires at ultra high velocity. Now that velocity gives precision and penetration, as you can see with 157mm of armor piercing penetration. That's quite a bit better than the 120 and 128 of the previous two tanks. 128 for the T1 Heavy and 120 for the KV1. But where it really, really starts to take off is in that premium penetration. It has 221mm of average penetration with its APCR shell. And not only that, It gets a little extra damage over the American 76, but where you really start to notice the dispersion and the aiming time. It has reduced aiming time, but instead of talking in .42 or .43 like the previous two vehicles, we're looking at almost a full tenth of a meter smaller dispersion spread. And what that means is that this tank has the penetration, the accuracy, and the gun handling to get shots on target regardless of range. You literally can fire across the map, and you don't need to think that because I'm talking about long range firing, you don't have to necessarily be hanging way back behind the tank destroyers and back with the artillery to be making use of this gun and its capabilities. You may be pushing with the lead tanks, and a target pops up halfway across the map. And with a lot of the heavies at Tier 5, if you turn to fire, there's not much chance of hitting that target at 500 meters away. But with this vehicle, and especially once it's mounting this top weapon, you can actually nail a target. And something else that comes into play is the velocity of this gun. And it's not something that you see a lot of people talk about. The shell velocity allows you to lead targets better. A fast-moving target can be hard to hit if your gun's low velocity. You have to put a lot of lead on it, and the shell just kind of lobs over towards it. And if the target makes any change in direction, slows down, speeds up, and you've led him way, way far ahead expecting him to keep going the same direction, same speed, well, any change will make your shell miss. Well, a pinpoint accurate high velocity gun, you don't have to lead the target much, and that gives him very, very few chances to turn, dodge, and weave. Now, my Ace Tanker replay battle here that's going to be coming up after I get done going over the tank doesn't have the highest percentage of accurate shots, but that's because of the ranges I was working at while bottom tier. And you'll still see that I was very, very effective while being bottom tier, just basically by using the accurate gun to throw shells down range, and with the rate of fire this thing has, just put enough shells on target, it's got the penetration. You'll hit the target, and in most cases, you'll penetrate it. But while this tank's not about the armor, I will go over it. The hull is the DW2's hull, basically. The VK was basically a upgraded version of the prototype that the DW2 started. That program morphed into this, and then on down the line. It has the same 50mm all around that the DW2 had. Now again, just like if you watch my DW2 guide, and you're coming to that from watching my channel previously, I talked about side scraping on the DW2. Same thing applies here. You got lots of road wheels that act as spaced armor, and decent tracks. Not as thick as the KV1s, but if you have to get into a position where you're going to be taking hits in a VK, you want to be side scraping. It's a box on tracks, and that does help by deflecting shells off your side. The turret's a bit better off with 80 in the front and 60 around the sides and back, and a decently curved gun mantlet that will actually help eat up a lot of shells or ricochet them off. And also, if it ricochets up, it can ricochet down. Most people at the tier won't know it, but that has a shot trap effect. If you fire into it and bounce off of it, it'll go down into the hull. Most people don't know about this tier, so it's not something to worry about. But I will show you at tanks.gg the VK and how to use it best with what armor you actually have. Here we are on tanks.gg looking at the VK. Now again, you don't see a whole lot of red. This is not a heavily armored vehicle for the tier. 50mm of armor is basically medium levels of armor. There's mediums at tier 5 with more armor than this. So if you must take a hit, like I said, you need to be side scraping. Side scraping can help save you and produce bounces that most people wouldn't expect to happen. But unlike the KV1, you can't get carried away with your angling. You have to angle very steeply to produce effective armor. Now, very steeply would be you need to be shooting inside your track that you're exposing. Not directly over the corner like with the KV1. That would show too much to your side. But you need to be shooting just inside of your track. So if you're trying to figure out how to angle, aim just inside of your track that you're using to deflect. And by doing that, you can produce armor that's actually higher than 100. Which, as you can see, the angle that I'm producing here is 70 degrees, which is an automatic bounce for anything that's not going to be what they call a triple overmatch. Now, triple overmatch is simple. Take your armor, multiply it by 3, and the gun has to be bigger than that. Well, that means that 50 millimeters armor, you'd have to have at least a 150.1 millimeter gun or bigger. It couldn't be 150, it has to be 150.1 or bigger to be an instant penetration. Now, better yet, of course I've already said hold down on both tanks preceding it, but it really applies to the VK. If you can cover up the weaker hull, the turret's not bad. It's 80 millimeters of frontal armor, and combined with the mantlet, you have at minimum 80, but all the way up to 147, where the mantlet overlaps the turret cheek, and as you can see on some of the curved portions, it can approach well over 240. So you have lots of armor there to work with only on the turret. So if you can get completely hull down, and that would be debris or maybe a dead tank that covers the hull entirely and you're only showing your turret, the VK can actually bounce some shots that way. But none of this is what the tank's about. You could almost just skip through this and play it just fine. What the tank is about, again, is the gun, making it perform, and the tank's actually small for a heavy with decent view range. So, in my equipment loadout, I actually run optics. Because this thing is actually small enough, if you must, like say endgame situations where it's you stranded against a medium, you can get into bushes. And with coated optics, vents, and I also have recon up there, and you'll notice situational awareness is being trained. I actually have view range of 421 meters, which is over 100 meters greater than a stock KV1. I will spot him far sooner than he'll spot me, because I'm also smaller and a harder to spot tank. I'll spot him first, and I have the gun to get onto target quicker and get off the first shot faster, and I'll have a follow-up shot coming probably before he even gets a chance to spot me and then turn his gun. So I could easily have 2 shots on target before he even is aimed and fired on his first. And that's a pretty potent combination. So, to enhance it even further, again, like I said, I have Sixth Sense and Recon on my commander. I have Snapshot on my gunner to help get the bloom down and get the gun on target faster. I did throw repairs. I have clutch braking on the driver, and again with the repairs. And then I have repairs and situational awareness on the radio operator. That's helping my view range there. And again, DPM vehicles, I tend to like having safe stowage and repairs to help to get the tracks up, because I do side scrape with this tank when I am top tier. But that's the VK, and basically it's a heavy tank that's more about its gun and overall capability rather than its armor. But I'll send you on to the Ace Tanker replay, and then we'll come back to the Churchill. Okay, here we are in the Vk30.01H, and I actually find myself bottom tier on fjords. For me, being bottom tier with this tank is not something to be too worried about, especially considering when there's a 3-tier spread on the battlefield. You now follow the newly implemented 3-5-7 rule. There can only be 3 of the top tier tanks, 5 middle tier, and 7 bottom tier. So you got lots of same tier targets to shoot at. And plenty of mid-tier and only a few vehicles that are going to be truly difficult for you to handle. And that shows up here. We got the 3 tier 7 enemies, the 5 tier 6s, and the rest are all 5s, tier 5s. Now, with that being said, I'm still going to take up a position that suits this gun rather than being the normal heavy. Now, I'm going to be in a gap here that my team is not deploying to cover. On fjords, you need to cover this central area. We have one tank who's moved right up where he should be, run the corner there, and I'm going to cover his side here. This position allows you to get shots into the gap, which that is a long ways away, and even though I have an accurate gun, you'll see that I still, with the range that I'm dealing with, it's still a struggle to get some shots on target. But I do manage to sneak one hit into the KV85 there. And a second. I decide I'm going to turn my attention up here. The enemy's behind a rock, but as you can see, I'm in concealment, and I'm able to cover my teammate in the middle. And right here is a prime example. I'm able to easily punch through this Jag Panther. I spotted him and punched right through him with no trouble with just regular ammunition. And their fronts can be somewhat tough. Now, here we are, very long range. And I didn't let that first shot aim. Firing at the front of the premium, the Vk30.01H. That's the Tiger 2 prototype. Now, for a tier 7 heavy, he's not ultra tough, but that angled front can be troublesome for lower tier vehicles such as mine. But as you'll see, this gun's able to switch back and forth between targets, and I will finally, when I get a chance to. Now right here, got the KV85, he jumped out, he made the mistake of getting in front of where I was aiming. But when I need to, I can always switch to premium, and then that VK will be an easy target. But before I decided I need to switch to premium, he actually turns his turret. Now, when he turns his turret sideways, I have much thinner armor to shoot at, and it's flatter. So I take advantage of that. But then when he turns his turret back towards my direction, I'm struggling, and I do decide it's finally time to load premium. And with that 221 millimeters of penetration, he is no problem to cut right through. Now, I look around and realize I'm the last one left in this position. So I decide I need to get some eyes further up. And there's a T-67 who's been unspotted and shooting my teammates. I decide I'm going to break contact and back down. I want to come at him from a different angle. So I swing around and get this big rock outcropping in between his position and mine. Now I know he can see me because I just got spotted again. But I'm motoring up towards him because I also want to cut off that Cromwell from being able to escape. Because this battle's still close enough it could go one way or the other. But if I could cut these two guys off, that would open up this whole north. And I know that T-67's is up. He's up there. He keeps spotting me. But his teammate, the Cromwell, has neglected to pay attention to me getting spotted. And I'm able to come right up. He's only able to land one hit on me. And that's a fair trade in my opinion. Because I still had full health up until that point. Now I see a T-67, I lock onto him, and or an ELC there, lock onto him. And I see the T-67 has bailed and went south. And I'm watching him on the map, and right here I make the decision to go back, there for a while have been deciding whether to push on to the north or to turn back to help my artillery. And I do decide to come down here, and I watch as the T-67, he makes his way up and over towards our artillery. I've got a building in the way and I can't get a clear shot. But looks like he took one massive hit, and then the artillery, it looked like he ram killed him. So my travel back was for nothing, but normally T-67 would be able to handle himself against the artillery, but the artillery made fairly quick work of him. And now basically I want to go and get stuck in the fight here. Try to help knock out these last two enemy tanks here over on the embankment. I was hoping to get over there before we lose any more people, because the battle is still close. Right as we take somebody out, they seem to be able to take somebody out. And with it this close, you never know what can happen. Right now I'm just motoring in, trying to get over there. Try to save teammates as well as rake in some more damage if I can. My teammates managed to clean them all up, though we lose one more. But at this point it's just 2 artillery, and we still have 5 total vehicles, so we are looking pretty good at this point. One thing I'm keeping an eye on is the fact that I am of such low health that either one of those artillery could finish me off. So you're going to see me play quite cautiously here, keeping trees and shrubs and even buildings in between me and where the normal artillery spots are. Because normally you'd see artillery up in this northwest corner. And I'd hate to have been having a pretty good game so far and just get blasted to smithereens. Because that's, it always happens that an artillery can shotgun you while you miss almost every shot on them. Even while you're on the move, they seem to be able to hit you. So I am playing it very cautiously here. I'm taking the role that the VK is really built for, a overwatch and support role. I even say that here in chat. Artillery's trying to tell me to go search, but he doesn't realize that I'm better off doing exactly what I'm doing. Let the SU, who's actually faster and more durable, run around a spot while I just keep him covered. I pull back to get the mountain in between me and wherever the bishop has managed to go. And I am at this point suspecting he's got to be in the middle somewhere, because he was able to hit me earlier and we haven't spotted him yet. So I start driving around the corner here, and I'm almost suspecting he was going to be over behind the rock outcropping up ahead of me, or off to my right. You see me panning it back and forth, and he is actually over to the right. I miss a shot, but I aim, miss another shot, so I auto aim, and then I stop and say to myself, well, I'm just going to stop and make sure these shots actually go in, because it looks like he's been AFK. So there is the ace. I did get a bruiser. I've got also the duelist and fire effect, and there's the high caliber. A little VK actually was the top in damage out of all the tanks, even while bottom tier, with 2,298 damage. I got the 3 kills, 1,240 experience. And I did spam the shots a lot with 34 shots fired, 26 hits, and 19 penetration. Okay, here we are on the 4th tank so far in the guide. This will be the last tank in this part 1 of 2. I'll have the second part coming up within a day or so following this one. But we have the British tank here, the Churchill 1. Now, the Churchill 1 is kind of an oddball of the vehicles in that it has a number of World War I obvious similarities from the original tanks, as you have the tracks going all the way around the tank on the outside, and you even still have a hull-mounted gun. Those are definite World War I throwbacks. Now, the Churchill is the most sluggish out of all the Tier 5 heavies, and that is something that does come into play with how much you like it or not. The engine is weak. That so far the lowest horsepower, I do believe. Yes, the VK has a little bit more horsepower and a bit less weight. The Churchill is a little heavier and a little weaker, which leads into its 25 top speed. This is 25.7, but I guess you'll have to dive off a bridge to get that extra 0.7. It is a sluggish tank all around. It turns slow, it drives slow, it climbs hills slow. You're not going anywhere fast in anything that says Churchill in the name. Now, the other two parts of a heavy would be, of course, the survivability and the armor and the weaponry. One good thing going for the Churchill is the gun. Much like the VK, the gun is quite good. You're looking at the high velocity Vickers. That's what the HV stands for at the end. It's a 75mm Vickers high velocity gun. Good rate of fire at 12.5, with the next best armor piercing penetration and the next best premium penetration. And that's why you play the Churchill. Is if for some reason you don't want to go down the German line and you don't want to play the VK, but you still want a better gun than normal, because the accuracy, the aim time, and the penetration are all very good on this tank. And not to spoil anything too bad, but that's where all the good stops. Nothing else about the vehicle is standout. Nothing else about the vehicle really leads the tier. The armor here is a lie. The 177 millimeters of frontal armor is a total lie. And I'll show you where that is. The tank is very vulnerable to artillery. The tracks get blown off all the time. What armor you do have is flat, and basically the saving grace is if you love that high velocity Vickers gun. Now, you could probably already tell this is not my favorite of the tier, and I'll say why. The Churchill basically tries to be the tank that the VK is, but while trying to add a little bit of extra survivability. The problem is that everything that the Churchill does, the VK does better. And the little extra bit of survivability, based on the slightly thicker armor that you can see on paper, is completely negated by how sluggish it is, and the fact that it's bigger. So, it doesn't do what the VK does. It's meant to be a support tank. It gains a little bit of extra durability from people who don't know how to aim. The only spot that frontal armor is true is on that little plate right there. If you can see that, I'll show you more on tanks.gg, but this little plate right there that's around the howitzer, this front hull mounted howitzer, that's it. That's where the 177 millimeters of armor is on that plate, plus the standard hull plate behind it. As you can see right there, you can see there's a plate, here's a plate. Those two combined are 177. That's it. They put that on paper to make you think that you got a really tough frontally armored tank. You don't. The T1 Heavy is much more durable. The KV1 is much more durable. This thing, all flat, and the only spot that has the thick armor is right there. And I'll show you, like I said, I'll show you more on tanks.gg, but the quick summary is the tank tries to be a support tank, but everything that a support tank needs to do related to the gun, the VK is better at, while being a better overall chassis for the weapon. This is a decent weapon on a bad chassis. This chassis is too slow, sluggish, and bulky to make best use of a high velocity, quick firing gun, because your weakness is that all of your armor's flat. There's no gun mantlet. This is 88 millimeters thick. Everything can shoot through it. Even tier 4s, even some tier 3s can shoot straight through you. And then you have these huge flat sides, thin armor, tracks get blown off all the time. The rear's even worse. But I'll go to tanks.gg so you can see for yourself. Now looking here at the Churchill, get rid of the VK, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's only one spot on the tank where it actually has the 177 millimeters of armor. It's just that extra plate. As you can see, it's the only red spot on the tank. And you see a lot of green and a lot of yellow. Now, yellow and green mean easy penetrations. For those of you who aren't familiar with tanks.gg, I should have said that with the very first one, but green means easy penetration, yellow means pretty easy, orange means somewhat difficult to penetrate, red means difficult. Now, the only spot that would be difficult for same tier vehicles to penetrate would be right here on that little plate. But nobody's going to shoot you there. They can shoot your upper plate and go right through it. They can shoot your lower plate, go right through it. Because you got to remember, everybody you face has more than 88 millimeters of penetration. Everybody. You don't face anyone who has less, unless you're talking about tier 3s. But when I'm talking about equal or higher tier vehicles, equal tier, everybody has more penetration. And your armor's flat, so it's bait for heat shells, because heat goes through flat armor easily. Well, even that 63 millimeters of side armor, oh, it's got a big hatch that just screams shoot me on it. Tier 3s can find that that's an aiming point. And shots through there can kill your radio operator and your driver. Depends on which side that you're shooting from, because your driver sits over here, shot right through there, kills him. Now, artillery also loves you. You are slow, 25 at top speed, and it's a gearing issue as well as a engine power issue. So somebody pushing you isn't going to do much more, because a lot of British tanks were geared low. Well, artillery gets to look at you like this. You're just plodding along at 25 at best. More often than not, more like 20. Oh, you have 15 millimeters of armor on top. When I've played artillery, I have one-shot Churchills more than any other tier 5 heavy. And things like a Bishop or an FV304, they get to do full damage to you, whereas something like a KV1, they're going to do half as much damage to him as they will to you. So, you're going to get picked on big time. Oh, and also, not just the howitzers from artillery, howitzers from mediums. If they nail that door, and that is the aiming point, they get to do full damage to you. If they nail your back end, that's only 50 millimeters. Most of the howitzers have slightly higher HE penetration than that. Like I was going over, the Russian has over 60 millimeters of penetration. Well, if he catches you on the side and hits that door, or the back end, or your upper plate, he gets to do absolute full damage. And remember, that was 450 damage per hit. So, much like the VK, even though the paper specs and the statistics in the garage look good, with thick armor on the front and better armor all around than the VK, once you actually get to looking at it, very easy to kill tank. So you have to learn to rely on that gun, just like the VK. So to do so, let's go back to the garage. Back over here in the garage, like I did actually for the VK, I set this thing up as a support vehicle. Rammer and vents for DPM, coated optics to get the view range up, and even without the fully trained commander, I have a view range of 383. Not bad. Now, ideally, if I wanted to spend the credits to retrain all these guys, they'd be full repairs all the way, but they were a mismatch crew from a couple of other vehicles that I just threw together. But my suggestion would be repairs all the way. But I will send you on to the Ace Tanker replay, which you'll see is actually a little bit more of me actually getting a chance to put this tank on the front line and be more of a frontline tank rather than the support unit that it is. And I will give a word of advice. The replay I'm going to show you does not showcase the weaknesses of the tank, nor does it really put the tank under much stress. I get to take on, I don't run XVM or any mods of any kind, but I would have to suggest that my team probably was pretty good, and the enemy team must have been a lot of new players or terrible players, because I basically got to demolish a team. And you'll get to see that here in this Ace Tanker on Ensk. Okay, here is my Churchill right here on Ensk. And like I had said in the garage there, you're going to get to see me play this in a way that you normally won't get to experience with this vehicle. I will actually get to lead the charge with it, so to speak. Now, technically, it's a tier 6 battle, but as you can see, there's almost no tier 6s. It's very, very limited in how many we've got. I only have 3 ahead of me on my team, and that means basically I'm practically the top tier heavy, so I'm going to play like it. Just like as you've seen with my T1 Heavy to start out this first part of the guide. Even though I'm not technically top tier, I'm going to play like it. So I will actually just make my way over at the leisurely pace of the Churchill. They got to drive carefully. Don't want to spill that tea with the really corny joke there. But I know others have used that over and over. There's got to be one reason to explain why all of the British tanks seem to be so slow as far as the heavies. But in reality, it's because they were meant to be support tanks for the infantry, and they didn't need to go any faster than what the walking pace of the infantry was. But actually, getting back to the battle, I plant one hit right into the T-14 before he can back up. And I got a Churchill 3 with me. Of course, basically he's the same tank, but mounting a 6-pounder gun, and he gets the skirts over the tracks for a little extra space armor. He pushes around, and I'm going to push in right behind him, trying to keep him supported, but he actually keeps blocking me in, so I'm just taking shots as I can get them into the T1 Heavy. As you can see, the T1 Heavy, as he pulls back and is only showing his front, he's able to bounce this 145 penetration gun. And that's what I was talking about wiggling and angling and moving with the T1 Heavy. But so far, he's been pretty lucky to bounce some shots there. But I start focusing in on the M4 Sherman as he backs up. And if I can get rid of him, that'll open up this area. My teammate finishes him off, and I decide I'm going to push in, and notice the T-14 is not paying any attention to me at this point. So, one thing is you'll see me do here, I track him, and I'm getting the assistance damage because he's tracked. I also managed to snag the kill, and this KV1's ignoring me completely. So as you can see, I aim in on his track, wasn't able to take it out. My tracks absorbed his shot. His second hit punches right through my front. I auto-aim onto the Swedish medium and take him out. We just keep plowing right on through. And man, is that Churchill sluggish when you've got your crew knocked out. There's Wolverine. I knock him out, and this has just turned out to be a complete rout. So it's not... This isn't really necessarily showcasing the tank per se, other than it is showcasing how effective the weapon is. And when the tank doesn't necessarily have to be the focal point of the enemies, that weapon can shine. And as is, that ends up being my final shot. Okay, I'm going to speed this up at 2.5 times speed so that you don't have to bear with Churchill just plodding along to finish out the battle as the last artillery is killed there. Instead, we'll go on to the results. As you can see, I did have the ace tanker. Down here, I've got the bruiser as well, a fighter, a fire for effect. And I'll let my mouse catch back up. And the high caliber over here. To get the ace, I dealt 1,729 damage at the 4 kills, and 959 experience is what it took, which is the lowest out of all the tier 5 heavies so far. Now, I had 18 shots fired, 18 hits, and 15 penetrations. That does showcase the effectiveness of the gun. And, without needing to fire premium, as you can see over there, I actually earned over 21,000 credits. As you can see, the ammo cost is quite low, and final net was over 21,000. Okay, here we are back in the garage with the vehicle comparison tool. I'm just doing this as a quick little interlude. We've already went over the T1 Heavy, the KV1, the Vk30.01H, and the Churchill one. This has been part 1 of my Tier 5 Heavy overview and guide. And next we will be starting with the BDR, and then finishing up with the KV1S and OI Experimental. But that will be in part 2, so look for that in the upcoming day or so. And this has been Mongoose Jake. Just wanted to say thank you for watching, and please stay tuned for part 2, featuring those last 3 tanks and my overall opinions on all in a quick summary format. But again, thanks for watching.